Before I met this morning's guest, 3 years ago, her life was in the pits. Now you'll meet her this morning, coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Myrtle Beach Marriott Resort at Grand Dunes. We're focused on last Thursday's featured speaker at the 67th annual meeting of the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce. Southern humorist and columnist and author Ronda Rich. Good morning, Rhonda.
And one of your favorite people, tell
Oh,
them.
and absolutely one of my favorite people until last week's column came out. I'm kidding. And you were great last Thursday.
Thank you.
Unbelievable.
Thank
What a
you.
following. You had a standing ovation.
I have a following because of you.
Well, no.
And and I did tell that when I spoke to them last week at the chamber, that when I started my column, I now have 53 newspapers, but you were one of the first dozen newspapers that stepped up.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Well, I will never forget.
You are a visionary.
Yeah. No, I will never forget that day. It was great. Mary Edie's the visionary.
Exactly.
And you and I would like to think we're visionaries. It's Mary Edie, literally. I mean, think about it.
Exactly.
She brought you in. I hadn't even owned the Herald for a year.
Yeah, not long.
We're in the conference room there at the Herald, the nice, great facility out on the former Air Force Base, and there you are. And I thought, column, my Lord, I just want to meet this woman. I'll do anything, sure.
You know, I think that you were one of the top 5 easiest sales I ever had.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, because I said to you, well, I have this column. It was a new idea that I was doing. And you went, how much? I said, and you said, all right, when can we start? Can we start next week?
That's right.
Yeah.
I think we did.
Yeah.
I think we did.
I've had 2 or 3 publishers call me up and say, I want it, and that's the easiest.
Right.
But as far, so many people take so long to make a decision.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I usually say it takes about a year to get a newspaper. You know, yeah, just going through the decision making, and they find the budget and they find the space and all of that. But
even in community newspapers,
yes.
Obviously you're in a lot of weeklies and dailies.
Yes, and you know, when I designed Dixie Divas, it was for weekly newspapers because I thought that, you know, the weekly newspapers serve that core newspaper community.
Right, sure.
And I felt like that they needed some really good journalism, that it was something that someone who was a nationally best-selling author who had a platform to speak about the South, that it would work. So I really designed it for weekly newspapers, and my first three newspapers were weeklies, and then the 4th and 5th were dailies, and then after that I have as many dailies and maybe more dailies than I have weeklies.
Is that right?
At that point.
Of course, you've got a lot of experience with newspapers.
Exactly, started in newspaper.
And I think later I saw, even towards the end of your newspaper career, had a large stint at USA Today, right?
Yeah, I had not a long stint, but a short stint. I was called up, but when USA Today started, I was working for a Gannett-owned paper called The Times in Gainesville, Georgia. And Gannett always said that they scoured all of their newspapers to find the best and the brightest. And I had won some sports writing awards, and I got called up on a Saturday night. I'd been to cover a Georgia-Auburn football game, came back to the newspaper, and they said they want you in Washington on Monday. But my forte then was covering NASCAR racing. It was just becoming a very hot sport. It was a great sport for USA Today to cover because it was a fledgling paper. You know, it's such a powerhouse now. It's hard to remember back when that was a huge step.
This would be in the late 80s, early 90s.
Mid-80s.
Right.
And to take, this would probably been like 87, to take, you know, news stories and make it very concise and put a lot of color there.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody was doing much color.
Most
You didn't
black and white. We think of newspapers black and white,
Yeah, and that was just such a step forward for them. Well, the American auto industry was really supporting USA Today. It was buying these huge full-page ads. And they wanted to give back to the auto industry, so they covered NASCAR. Because the theory was, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. So if Ford won on Sunday, they sold on Monday.
And did the theory work?
It worked.
It worked.
I don't know that it still works like that because now everything's more divided into your favorite driver. But then you were either a Chevy man or a Ford man, and then Pontiac came into the blend, and then Dodge, and now Toyota's there. But it very much was a shootout between Chevrolet and Ford for many, many years.
Wow, Rhonda. It was fascinating getting ready, just getting ready to see you you last Thursday here at the Marriott at the Chamber's presentation to see about, reading a little bit about you and to see that you are speaking, looks like more than 100 times a year?
Yeah.
Are you just gone all the time?
Oh, right. You know, when I did the event in Myrtle Beach last week, I flew in the night before, in the middle of the night from New Orleans.
Right.
I had done an event there, and the day before that had been in Meridian, Mississippi. So, yeah, I stay on the road throughout the Southeast. It's a very busy time, and I love it. I'm just so blessed, so blessed.
Had you thought about writing from an early age, Rhonda? You've always, really? It's
always. I grew up loving books, and the story is I was born when my parents, later in life to them, they had 3 kids that were grown, and they put my mom to bed to rest as much as she could. And I had an older sister who was a freshman in college. They had just bought a set of encyclopedias for her. So my mom went to bed and started reading the encyclopedias while she was pregnant with me. And I came out of the womb literally loving books. I mean, when I was 4 years old, I won reading awards at the library.
Oh, come on. Age 4?
Age 4.
Rhonda.
I was fascinated by stories. I would come home from Sunday school on Sundays and retell the Sunday school lessons. Storytelling fascinated me. When I was 6 years old, I would pack the family suitcase and go to New York on book business. I mean, I just knew all my life that I wanted to write books.
At
always.
age 6.
At age 6.
Yeah. You have a vivid memory of stuff like that, Rhonda?
Yes.
I mean, can you really think back? Not to date you, but that's a few years ago.
Exactly. No, I do. I remember all of that stuff, and I think that's a mark of a storyteller. You have to remember the details, and I see details that other people who don't tell stories well or are not interested in telling stories, they don't see. And I see details in the simplest of things that bring a story alive and that's vivid in that storytelling.
Do those details stick out in your mind, or do you write them down when you see them so you don't forget them later?
I have a good memory. My sister always says I have a photographic memory, and I do not. I don't. But I have a good memory because I pay attention. And I think that having a good memory goes to really paying attention, listening, and watching. And if you do, it's kind of like taking a snapshot. You remember it.
Some of those great words you talked about last Thursday, oftentimes a great story will find you.
Exactly.
Will find you, and you regale and talked about a couple of great instances of that. One you didn't talk about, I don't think, last week was one I saw on your website, whatsouthernwomenknow.com, which was a dishwasher going out. Just the you could actually turn a dishwasher going out or going on the blink into an entire column, a weekly column or a daily column.
Yeah, I mean, it's so simple. It's like one day, a couple of friends were spending the night with me, a friend and her husband, and he was up before us, and I come out of my bedroom at 7, and he's looking out my window on my front porch, and he's going, "Come here," and I go over there, and there's a possum at 7 o'clock in the morning on my front porch, and possums are nocturnal animals, so if you see them, you know they're harmed, something's wrong. And it became a great story for me because something had bitten off half of the possum's tail, and I had to rescue it and take it back into the woods, and wrote a column about it. And then a producer for the biggest television show in London called me up and said, "We'd like to come to America and film you and your friend Stevie rescuing possums."
Oh, come on.
And I went, "Right, you're joking, right?" He said, "No, we think it'd be the most enchanting story. We think our readers would love it." And I went, "Well, you know, we don't rescue possums every day, just when we find them and they need so."
That is great.
So it's very funny when someone across the pond in London can find one of your stories and wants to do a story on it.
Southern humorist. Obviously, you've been out and about all over, not only the Southeast, but all over the country.
Right.
Even potentially now all over the world.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Kansas City is a good market for me. I go into Kansas City and do a lot of speaking engagements. Just did a big event at Disneyland in L.A. 1,500 women.
No.
And it was a standing ovation. You go into a place like that, and you don't know now, are they going to get us? Are they going to understand Southerners? But Jeff Foxworthy taught me this, that very often if it's funny to us, it's funny to everybody else.
Right.
You know, we may put a Southern twist on it, but, you know, if we find something that people connect with, like I tell a lot of mama stories.
Right,
and women connect to mothers. Everybody's got a mother, and everybody understands being beleaguered by their mother and all of that. But if it's funny to us, it's going to be funny in California and New York and Cincinnati.
Have you found that as your column? Have you looked at papers in parts outside of the Southeast or otherwise?
You know, I haven't, because there's still so much potential in the South where I haven't gone. And it makes sense to sell it here first, but yeah. I might eventually do that.
Yeah, I mean, based off of what Jeff Foxworthy had shared with you and the idea you've obviously picked up there in Los Angeles and Kansas City and other places, I'm sure it can do very well.
Yes, exactly.
And the column of your, the title of your column, Dixie Divas.
Right.
How'd you come up with that? Just thinking...
well, I love the fact that I wanted to pay homage to the South.
Right.
And the Dixie Chicks had come along, and they had proven that Dixie wasn't politically incorrect.
Right.
That you didn't offend people with that. And I've always loved Dixie.
Sure.
You know, and I wanted to say this is truly Southern, you know. So that was that. And then, you know, just to find something that played in, I like the DD. So it became Dixie Divas. I own the trademark on that. And it took 3 years going through all the process of getting it and all of that. But
did Dixie Do come before Dixie Divas or the other way around?
Dixie Do was right. Dixie Do is my dachshund.
Yes, right.
And let me tell you, her name came from this. The Atlanta Journal newspaper was the afternoon paper in Atlanta, and it was always the bigger of the newspapers for many years. And then the Atlanta Constitution, which was a morning paper, became bigger. And the Atlanta Journal had this great slogan they ran across their masthead, and it said, "Covers Dixie like the dew."
Oh, great.
And I love that. So about 10 years ago, they folded the Journal into the Constitution.
Right.
And on the day that they ran the last Atlanta Journal, I pulled that front page and saved it. Mm-hmm. And when I got Dixie Do, I was getting her as a puppy. I had already knew she was coming as a gift from my best girlfriend. Mm-hmm. I was looking for a name, and I ran across that paper, and I went, Dixie Do.
Right there.
And it's so funny because I can go to places. I was in St. Simons, Georgia not long ago, and I went to church. I was there to do an event, and I went to church that morning. And people were coming up introducing themselves, and they recognized me because I run in the Brunswick, Georgia paper. And this lady came over, and she said, what I really want to know is how's Dixie Do?
Oh, come on.
Yeah, so Dixie Do has her own following.
Well, we want to talk a little bit on whether we get it today. Hopefully you'll come back to be with us tomorrow.
Yes.
Rhonda, Claudette, Mary Grace, not only Dixie Do, but of course your mother.
Yes.
And a lot of folks want to get updates on them, folks who read your weekly column here in the Myrtle Beach Herald, but for folks who see it all over the place, wherever they're from, or folks who visit the Myrtle Beach area and may know it from their home in Gainesville or their home in Atlanta or otherwise.
And they can read it online with you.
That's exactly right. Folks can go online to myrtlebeachherald.com. Speaking of that, there are a lot of those great pieces.
Absolutely.
I went online early this morning just to print off last week's column, the column from last Thursday, which of course had some interesting stuff about dating younger men, Rhonda, which is very exciting. Of course, this is I'm just going to quote you real quick. Not even Dee Dee, the young woman there that you were going back and forth, a friend of yours.
This is when I started to shift in my seat.
Not even the Dee Dee expected me to move so quickly, but for a few years there's been a flirtation in my life with a handsome, sweet guy with abs that are rock hard and deep-cut muscles. I know we're not talking about anyone in this room. He's had a crush on me, and while I saw him occasionally in a casual way, I didn't, quote, date him because he's, well, too young. 10 years too young, or he was. That's all changed now. That's the big word now. We want to hear about this guy. You called him up.
Funny.
You want to date. Now, this isn't fiction. I love it. Want to date, I asked, then explained the new no one over 40. No one over 40 need apply rule. He laughed delightedly. I love this one last sentence. He laughed delightedly, and in less time than it takes to mascara, coat, one eyelash, he explained, baby, I'm there. When? I'm there. I'm moving. I'm coming quick. Now, I want to hear about this guy. And, of course, some of your other great, I'll give you a second, too, I think about that.
No, you don't have to.
Who's the lucky one, sitting up with the dead, crazy runs proud through the South?
Yes.
Folks can go online to myrtlebeachherald.com and see some of the tremendous columns all the way back here to May 10th of this year. But, of course, you've been with us online for 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah, I can't remember how long it's been. Yeah.
It has been. Thank you for letting us do that. But share with us a little about this guy under 40 who...
Actually, I wrote about him in my first book, What Southern Women Know. And I met him one night. I was flying back from L.A., and it was one of those horrendous trips. And at that time, he worked for Delta. And I had sat on the runway in L.A. It had been awful. I got to the airport, my luggage lost. It's midnight. It's pouring down rain. And I see this guy, and I'm going to go over there and let him have it.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, because I'm at my wit's end.
Right.
And as I get to him, I suddenly go, wait a minute. This guy's had a hard day too, probably.
Right.
A lot of luggage lost. I'm going to be nice.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So when I get over to him, I said, you look like just the one who could help me. And he said, I bet I can. What do you need? And I said, my luggage is lost. And I mean, he just immediately got on, found my luggage, they put it on another plane, they deferred it, brought it back to me. And I said, now, I should get some coupons or something free for this. And he said, yeah. So he just starts giving me all these coupons. And we just struck up this great friendship. And he actually is a great friend of mine. I don't really see him very often. And since
come on,
No, honestly.
No, that's fine.
Honestly, the last time I saw him was probably about 3 months ago. We had dinner one night, but I don't see him very much. His name's Heath. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy.
Yeah.
But he's become a great friend. And my great story about that is this, that you do win so much more with kindness.
Right.
Than, you know, I had every right to be antagonistic. And I mean, because it had been a day of horrible incidences. But I tried kindness, and I won a great friend out of it. Got a lot of free coupons for the airline, so try it.
I love it. It was not only the standing ovation in the room last Thursday at the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce 67th annual meeting. It was the standing ovation back at the set of The View when the producers and other folks in the back there were clearly standing up the standing ovation because you did exactly what you just said. Using kindness as opposed to coming back with snappy answers or otherwise being aggressive here. Now would have been a great time to come back at me and open up about something else fun, but at the same time you opened up and shared with us about Heath and that great story.
Yeah.
We got about 5 minutes.
Great stories.
Oh, absolutely.
They're great stories, and we find great. I mean, that's why I believe I was born to be a storyteller, because great stories find me. You know, I walk out and I just see a great story. I meet a lot of people on airplanes and in airports that become great friends of mine. You know, here's my favorite story, and I wrote about this. You've run it in the Herald, but I was in L.A. a few months ago. And had a couple of friends. Your friend, John Maroney, was with us, and we were at the Polo Lounge.
Oh, yeah.
John had wanted to take us to the Polo Lounge. And he, of course, is from North Carolina originally. So John's sitting there, and I'm sitting there, and I had taken one of my girlfriends with me as a treat. I'd given her the trip because she had done some window treatments for me. And we were chattering. We're all Southerners. And this man leans over, and he goes, where y'all from? And I said, well, I'm from Georgia, and they're both from North Carolina. He said, Birmingham, Alabama. And we strike up this conversation, and we say to the guy, what are you doing here? And he said, I sell coffee. And we said, really? And he said, I'm here trying to break into the L.A. market. And he gives us a card, and he's with a company called Royal Cup Coffee. And my girlfriend said, this is my favorite coffee. My husband owns a Jiffy Lube, and that's all he will serve is that. And he said, when I get back, I'm going to send y'all coffee. And okay. So we give him our cards. Next day, my girlfriend says, I think he'll really send us coffee. I said, well, that man forgot us the moment he walked out of there. And she starts digging in her purse, and I said, what's his title? And she said, it says president. I said, president? Well, his name's Hatton Smith. 3 days later, big box of Royal Cup coffee arrives. Huge box. I call him up to thank him. I said, what's your wife's name? I'm going to send you a copy of What Southern Women Know. Because that's the way Southerners are. You can't outdo us. You can't outgive us. You give us something, we got to give you something back. And now Hatton Smith's become a great friend of mine. And out of that was born a great story that someone else read that column and wrote me and said, I sell waffles for Waffle House.
Oh, boy.
And he said, we buy all of our coffee from Hatton Smith, and he is that kind of guy. He keeps his word, and he's a true Southerner. And this guy by the name of Walt Emmer, we become good friends and, you know, just start talking. And I'm talking to Hatton one day, and I said, hey, I've made a new friend. He works for Waffle House. And he said, yeah, Walt, he's president of Waffle House. I said, Walt is president of Waffle House? He didn't tell me he's president. We've been friends for 3 or 4 months talking. Didn't even know he was president.
No, Rhonda. I love it. I love it.
Great stories, just how one leads to another and friendships are made.
Absolutely. We got about 5 minutes, and I mentioned The View, and I love that story. Folks need to catch you in person or see you live to hear great stories like that. Is that right? I mean, you don't let all your secrets out of the bag on air. I mean, those are tremendous things.
Right.
You did share with folks, though, about what it takes to get a bestseller. I mean, folks want to know that. They obviously hear about it.
Well, you always have to get a break. You've got to get a good piece of media, and sometimes if you get a good piece of media, it still doesn't work. I did an interview early on The View, and Barbara Walters is a bit tough on me. I tell that story.
Right, yeah, great story, sure. Folks need to hear it live time.
Yeah, and it really was one of those things that really sparked a lot of chatter, chatter on the internet, and people talking, girlfriends would say, did you see that interview, and did you see how that Ronda Rich was treated, and they went on the line and they started looking up and they found What Southern Women Know, and it really gave us a bestseller. I mean, that book is a perennial bestseller every year. It's been out for several years now.
And it's 26, not to cut you off, 26 or 27th printing?
Headed to its 27th print.
What is that like, Ron? I mean, just to say that I've penned a book, and that was in the late 90s?
Yeah, 99 was when the hardcover came out.
So 8 years ago, and to think now it's in its 26th printing, that's incredible.
And not only that, but it really spawned for me an entire cottage industry.
Right.
Because from that was born my speaking engagements, where I did a lot of Southern storytelling, my newspaper column, product sales, everything that came from that. It's just, it's pretty incredible. I was naive. Everybody thinks they can write a book, I think. I think we all do have a book in us, and it's finding it, and it's putting it on paper and doing it in a way where people can tell the story and enjoy it when they read it. And that's what happened with What Southern Women Know. It just was a lovely, lovely accident for me. I wrote it completely an idea of an agent in New York who loved the South, who thought that Southern women really had some kind of recipe for success that the rest of the world didn't have.
This was an agent in New York from the South?
Right, no, he grew up, born and bred in Manhattan.
Really?
I mean, he was probably a third or fourth generation New Yorker.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the loveliest men I've ever known, Richard Curtis, and just a very kind, gracious man, just very lovely. And he actually, I taught him about the South, and he taught me about the Jewish people. I learned a lot from him.
Right?
Oh yeah, I learned things from him that he was just a wealth of information, things that, because I never realized until I met Richard Curtis that the Jewish people didn't name their children Junior or Second or Third.
Really? Oh yeah, that's interesting.
Just very fascinating stuff. So we were both great teachers to each other.
We've got a couple of minutes. We want to get you back tomorrow to talk about My Life in the Pits, of course, the town that came a-courtin', and What Southern Women Know about flirting. But I think a comment you made just in a couple minutes, that idea that everyone's got a book in them. For our viewers that are sitting home now with the idea of, I want to get a book out, I think I've got one in me. What are some of the steps that they should take? Just in a couple minutes, what are some of the steps they should take to think about doing that? Well,
first of all, you need to translate the thought onto paper, because until you do it, you don't know you can do it. Okay? And I always tell people, what you do is simply sit down and write the story as you would tell it to somebody that you were sitting there talking to. You just put it down the same way you would talk it out. The second thing is, I always recommend a great book by the name of the Guide to Literary Agents. And that, if someone buys that book and they read it, they can tell what agents represent what properties. So obviously, if you're writing romance fiction, you don't want someone who only represents science fiction to rep you. And then you query people, and it's writing a great query letter. If you can sell an agent to believe that you can write this book and sell it, that's a major part of the step right there. So you got to sell the agent first. Yeah, and you can't sell a book without having an agent.
A viewer cannot get their book out without having an agent.
No, unless they self-publish. They can self-publish, but the best step is to be an agent.
That's great. That's great advice. Folks can learn about you online at whatsouthernwomenknow.com. Whatsouthernwomenknow.com.
Or it's also RondaRich.com, Ronda without an H.
Good. RONDA, Rich.com. That's great. Absolutely. And of course, for folks who can't be with us tomorrow, they need to go online literally to learn about some of the, there's some great feedback on there about my life in the pits, and obviously talking about your tremendous both respect and love of some of the amazing men and women in NASCAR.
And NASCAR,
right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being with us
so
this morning. Can't wait to see you hopefully tomorrow morning. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Ronda Rich coming up next. You've got to come back to be with us tomorrow. You've got to come back. There's 3 books. We started talking about her first book, but listen to what the New York Times called My Life in the Pits, one of the greatest sports books ever written. One of the greatest sports books ever written. And the very exciting aspect, her last 2 books that came out in 04 or 05 were published on the exact same day by the same author. First time in publishing history. Same day. You got to come back tomorrow. Happy Halloween, Emma Claire.